This video explores critical use of sources and in particular will focus on reliability and usefulness. Firstly, we need to consider what is a good source. A source is anything which provides information. Most of the time this will probably be a website, it could be a news article, a textbook, a documentary, a lecture, a journal article, an interview, or many more sources. When we talk about what makes something good, in this context, we're talking about something that makes it reliable, something that makes it useful, something that helps us get a good understanding of the information and make some good quality work. When you hear people say things like, I read it on the internet, that could really mean it was a really great, really reliable, really useful source, or it could mean it was the most terrible thing in the world. So we need to develop a more sophisticated analysis of how useful are our sources and use the best ones. You'll hear me talk a lot in this about, are we talking about primary or secondary, particularly primary or secondary research, or primary or secondary experiments, or primary or secondary information, primary or secondary data. The way that you answer that question is you ask yourself, did the author of this source generate the information that he or she is talking about? If the answer is yes, then it's a primary source. As far as science is concerned, that will mean that the author is the one who conducted his or her own experiments. When you produce a PRAC report or an EEI, that's primary information when you're talking about the experiment that you did. This would also include things like eyewitness accounts, so things like autobiographies or memoirs or anything where the person who's writing it was the one who was there. Secondary sources are things where people are talking about information or experiments that other people conducted. So meta-analyses, so that means an analysis of other people's analysis, or critiques or summaries of others' research. We might be talking about a news article that's commenting on some research that someone did. It's not necessarily that one is better than the other. Typically, it depends on what your purpose is and about the quality of the actual source when we're talking about what is better. Now we will consider what makes a source reliable. There are lots of different factors that contribute to this, and then you can come up with an overall picture, such as a source is moderately reliable, highly reliable, unreliable. We'll consider each in turn. First thing to consider is the authority or expertise of the author. Who is this person? What does he or she know about the field? What are his or her qualifications? Why should I listen to this person's opinion on this matter? You also need to consider that person's intentions. Is this their professional area? Is this person trying to tell you something? Is this someone who has it as like a hobby? Is this just some opinion that someone is spouting that they may or may not have anything to back up? Another thing to consider is, has this information been reviewed? When and by whom? Some information, for instance, things in published books, things in peer-reviewed journals, things in some websites are reviewed before they're published. Some things, a lot of the time, a lot of online things are available for review after publication, which means that it can still be reliable and it adds to the reliability, but that generally being reviewed beforehand generally increases the reliability, but there are exceptions. You also need to consider who has done the reviewing. When you hear the phrase in science peer-reviewed, that means that the work has been reviewed by someone who works in that field, who has a good understanding of what all of the term means and what all of the issues are and how the issues relate to each other and things like that. Sometimes work might be reviewed, but it might only be reviewed by someone who's sort of doing proofreading and editing and things like that, who may not actually understand the science of what's going on. So that's something to consider as well. There's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different ways of doing studies. Some are qualitative analysis, some do quantitative analysis, some are longitudinal studies, some are double-blind studies, some have regression analysis, some are meta-analyses. There's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different ways of setting up experiments. And it's beyond the scope of this video to consider all of them, but that is something that you might need to consider. What is this experiment and what are the limitations of it? A lot of studies will identify their own limitations. For example, case studies will often give you a really detailed analysis of one particular case, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's applicable to anything else. Studies, particularly peer-reviewed ones, will identify their own limitations, and it's important to look at that and take that into consideration. You need to consider the funding arrangements or commercial interests. Is this article that's telling me that this product is really, really great, are they trying to tell me something? Is this website which is telling me that this other thing is a really, really, really big problem, are they trying to sell me something that I might be made to think will mitigate that problem? That's something that's really key that you need to think about, because often these things can often be hidden under several layers of things and can be quite pervasive. Another key thing about reliability is how does this source relate to other sources? And the two big things that will help you with that are references. What other sources does this one reference? Where is this source getting their information? Is it primary? If it's secondary, where is it pulling its information from? And does it corroborate with other sources? So corroborate means, does it agree with other sources? As well as reliability, we also have to consider what makes a source useful. Is it on your topic? You can have the most reliable source in the world, but if that article doesn't relate to your topic, it's not going to be very useful and it's not going to help you. Are you the intended audience? Again, you can have a really, really reliable, top-notch, long-term, longitudinal study that's done lots and lots of different analysis and has come up with all of this really great information. But if it's designed to be read by people who have a PhD in that topic and you're in grade 10, 11 or 12, then it's probably not going to be useful to you if you're not the intended audience. The other thing to consider are things like, what language is it written in? Now, automatically, a lot of the things you're going to be looking at are probably going to be written in English, but that is something that you need to consider as well. Is it done at the appropriate level? We just touched on that. You guys are probably going to be wanting to look at things that are designed for senior high school level audience. Now, a good giveaway about what things like that would be things like high school level textbooks, websites which say this is designed for grade 11 chemistry or whatever it might be, sources which are recommended to you by your teacher or by your librarian or things like that. Sometimes sources which are intended for the general public may be useful, but it'll depend on your topic. Be wary of picking sources which are aimed too high or too low, because even if they're very reliable, they're not going to be very useful. Sources need to be up to date. There are many areas of science which are moving so quickly that things get out of date very, very, very quickly. So you need to make sure that, again, even if you've got a really reliable resource, even if it's 10 or 15 years old, then it may not be relevant anymore and it may be just plain wrong by now. So you need to be making sure that the information that you're using is current. How accessible is it? Can you access it? If it's an online thing, can you download it? Again, there might be a whole lot of stuff that you can access, but if you need to buy a subscription that you don't have or something, then that's not going to be useful to you. If you can view something but you want your peers to look at it but they don't have the right software on their device, then again it's not going to be very useful if it can't be accessed. You also need to consider the reliability, because like we talked about before, if a source isn't very reliable, then there's really no way it can be useful, no matter how much all of the other things fit in. In summary, when you look at out there, there are an extraordinary number and variety of sources. We are expecting you to develop skills in using them critically. That means you need to analyse them for their reliability and for their usefulness. This is a really important evaluation skill, and you really need to learn to be able to make judgments about whether sources are useful or not, be able to justify why you've reached that conclusion, and then only use the sources which you've determined to be good sources using the criteria that we've spoken about.